Welcome to Tech Support, a podcast of the Mount Juliet Church of Christ, where we encourage and equip people to interact with biblical text. We are your hosts, Tim Martin and Brian LeMaster.
We are beginning a new series entitled Her Majesty. We're going to be looking at three different ladies who ended up being queens in the Old Testament. Today we're going to look at Bathsheba, then we'll also look at Jezebel and Esther in the coming studies. Tim, as we think about Bathsheba, we first want to get a little bit of context of where does she fall into the life and narrative kind of David? I feel like David's probably a good place a lot of people know in Scripture, but his life's kind of long there. Kind of walk us through where we are in the story.
Yeah, David has become king and kind of risen to power. You know, in 2 Samuel is really about the story of David as king, whereas in 1 Samuel we're dealing with Saul as king, the beginnings of the kingdom, the United Kingdom of Israel, and Saul pursuing David, the jealousy there, the story of David and Jonathan. And then we moved into 2 Samuel, and we move into the time where David is king. And this is not very late in his reign. We'll see that when we look at Bathsheba in 1 Kings, where David is dying and dies, and Bathsheba's involved there with the next chain of command, if you will, or the next person who inherits the throne between Adoniah and Solomon. But here we are. He has been out at war with Ammon and Syria in the previous chapter, in chapter 10 of 2 Samuel, then 11. The whole thing is set up around David not being where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be in the field with his soldiers, but he's at home. He's kind of derelict maybe in his duties in that. But David is king over a unified kingdom. He has, for the most part, put the Philistines and everyone else at bay. Constantly, David's at warfare here, but that's kind of where we are early on in here. Saul is long dead, and now it's in David's command. Everything in Israel is under David's reign.
What should people know maybe about Bathsheba before we jump into this? Like maybe her standing in society, or is there anything we know about her or should know about her before we get into this narrative a little?
No is hard to say, like with surety, but we certainly see some clues from the text that tell us she is in the upper echelons of society. Uriah is one of David's, 30 trusted men. He has a home very near to the palace. It's got to be close enough where David can see Bathsheba bathing on the roof, and close enough that he can tell she's good looking or beautiful. And so it's not a mile away. It's not 3 or 4 blocks away. It has to be pretty close. And so that would tell us that she's in the upper echelons of society. She's married to one of his generals, if you will. And so she is not, now where she comes from, I don't know. I think her name means father of an oath, or daughter of Sheba. So she may even be foreign. She may not be an Israelite. I don't know that. Tried to read. We just don't have a lot of biographical information on Bathsheba. But anyway, I think she's someone who's pretty well-to-do, and not somebody who's really, really down in the low echelons of society.
All right, so the opening scene where we come across Bathsheba for the first time is in 2 Samuel chapter 11. As Tim alluded to, David's men are out fighting. He stays back. And the way the text sets it up, it's almost like he's not where he should be. You know, like it's assumed that he should be out fighting. In verse 2, it said, it happened one late afternoon when David arose from his couch. So I guess he was getting a little afternoon nap in, and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And they replied back to who she was. This is the only instance where I think we have her name. Most of the time she's kind of referred to.
In 2 Samuel, yes. That's the only time we get her name.
A lot of times she's just referred to as Uriah, the Hittite's wife, which it repeats that here as well. So anyways, David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he laid with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanliness, and then when she returned to her house and the woman conceived, she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So opening scene here. The next part of this, if you're familiar with the story of David, the life of David, you probably know the interaction between her and Uriah, her husband. He ends up bringing her back from war and tries to make it to where he will sleep with her, but ends up, because of honor, not doing that. He slept outside his house there because he should be at war with his men. So he has this higher level of standard that's contrasted with David, who should also be out with his men, but is not doing what he's supposed to be. So David ends up sending a message through Uriah's own hand that he should be placed in the front of the battle. And in essence, David uses war to kill him, and he passes. But before we jump more into the narrative after that, this opening scene here, Tim, this is going to be a difficult question, and we'll wrestle with this in a minute. But before we look at kind of the Christian's vantage point of this throughout history, can you give us any insight to maybe how the different Jewish writings thought, or did they ever talk about Bathsheba? Is there anything that we can kind of know from any of those writings?
Not from anything that I could find, like in the intertestamental period. We do see instances of women bathing in public, and not necessarily fully nude in that way. I think if we think about maybe, I can't remember if it's Judith, I know Susanna, in some of the extension, Susanna is one of the extensions of Daniel, where a woman is bathing and people have to sneak in and they kind of see it. I think often because we shower in the naked, we take a bath naked.
I guess we should have did like a little warning. You may not want to listen to this episode in front of your children, but
I mean,
you know the title's Bathsheba.
Do your children take baths?
Well, I just meant depending on
we all take
where
baths.
This conversation all goes.
What goes on at the Lemaster's house? Y'all take showers with your clothes on?
No, I just meant due to the context of what occurs here in the story. But anyways,
well, that is a good.
There'll be some other words that we use later.
We need to explain why she was bathing. May not have even necessarily been one for cleanness. As far as hygiene,
yes,
he was purifying herself from uncleanness. David picked the wrong time to have sex with Bathsheba because she was at prime to get pregnant because she had just concluded her menstrual cycle, and that's what she was doing. She may very well have been washing herself with some manner of clothing, or we might call it a bathrobe or some kind of poncho type device on that she had on. It's not necessarily that she was completely naked, and that goes to some of the thoughts about her that have. I think there's a lot of argument about, okay, does she have any complicity in this? Is she, was she raped? Was she consensual sex? Was it just, hey, the king told me to come there?
Did she seduce him? Like, there's a wide spectrum of,
I think a lot of those things can be dismissed pretty quickly, but there's a lot of writing out there in scholarship about those thoughts. We don't know for sure. What we do know is David didn't recognize her. So I think we can preclude or omit any previous relationship or flirting or anything. The fact that he didn't know the wife of one of his most important generals is almost odd that the text makes sure and includes that. And as you said, Uriah is painted as the most honorable of soldiers and ultimately loyal to the king and kingdom, whereas David is not.
What's the movie that was not recently done, but that was done that kind of walks through this scene? I feel like you referenced it the other day, and I read it in one of my articles that I read.
I know some older movies.
When I said new, I didn't mean new.
I think Richard Gere's in King David. I think Gregory Peck, or maybe I'm thinking wrong, did a thing.
But there's some movies where they make it to where like Bathsheba and David have this like prior kind of romance going.
I think that's the Gregory Peck movie.
That's what it was. To where like that's not what we see in the text. It doesn't seem like they got this ongoing thing or this friendship relationship
written in the days when white males can do no wrong. When that movie was finally made.
The other thing to note, from what I could tell, like for her in this society, like bathing nude or being nude in public would be a shameful thing. This isn't like this is just a free society where, it's like acceptable and
looking
stuff.
Looking over her shoulder and waving at David, and having a we don't know any of that for sure, but it sure does not seem like that's the case because there's absolutely no blame put on Bathsheba. Now, one could say, as we'll talk about, she loses a child as a result of this, but the text, certainly that was traumatic for her. There's no question about that. But the text doesn't highlight that as her being sorrowful for it. It definitely highlights David's repentance and sadness and fasting and mourning over that child, knowing that child is going to die. We don't really get a perspective on Bathsheba or how she feels. And
different people make a case on each side of this argument of, is she a victim or is she the one, a full party, like equal conspirator, I guess. And they'll make a case either side, but the text is focused on David. So we don't get any info about her thoughts or her feelings other than we know that she grieved after the loss of the child. But other than that, we don't really get insight into her perspective or her conversation with the prophet, like Nathan or God or any. It's all focused on David.
Yeah, Nathan comes to David. He doesn't come to Bathsheba in this narrative. Obviously, he does over in 1 Kings.
Yes,
but we also have this woman has also lost her husband.
Mm-hmm.
He's been killed in battle before her son dies. And so there's nothing worse you can have, a loss of a spouse and loss of a child. Whether or not she, I read an article, I know you did too, about the definition of rape today
Mm-hmm.
versus then. And was it was any sexual act put upon her in any way by the opposite sex would be construed as rape today. I don't know what happened here, whether or not she was consensual once she got there. But it says in verse 4, he sent messengers and took her. And there's a lot of discussion about what does that mean. Not necessarily in Hebrew does it mean took her forcibly. And she came to him and he laid with her. I mean, it just really doesn't give us enough clues about that. If I had to think through it, I don't know that she was happy about this. I don't know that it was something she desired. Because there's no way from the text to think that she had forethought about this. But some think maybe she wanted the opportunity to sleep with the king, have a child with the king, and then she'd have a rival to the throne one day. That just seems sort of odd to me here.
And it seems like we're coming from a vantage point, or those that make that claim that we're trying to protect David.
Yes.
Or to make him out to be like, oh, there's no way David could do this all by himself. But everything in the text, it doesn't say she saw David. It does she may have been going when she was summoned. She may have thought it was something to do with her husband. Who knows if she even knew why she was being called to David to begin with.
Right. Well, we want to make David perfect. I don't know. David, he obviously was a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he didn't always act like he was a man after God's own heart. Just like Abraham didn't always act like he was the chosen one of God to bring a race out of. I do think it's mostly to protect David's reputation, which it doesn't need protection. David was a very noble person. He sinned. He made mistakes, not just this one. He had terrible children. And so it's even Solomon turns out to be one of the worst things that ever happened to the people of Israel because he was taken away to idolatry with foreign women. But he's not a perfect man. I think we try to portray him as that. And I think it takes away from the biblical text.
I want to read one, I guess, quotation from a book that I came across, and it was from a respected publisher and stuff like this. So this is not just a random website online. I won't really share who it's with because I am bashing it, but this is what it said about it. Had she been careful, modest woman, surely she would have looked around and easily seen adjacent roofs. And if there had been others looking her way, she would have been more appropriately modest in her bathing herself. Further, when sent for by David, had she been a true wife and a woman of principle, she would have refused to obey the king's summons. That was their description of Bathsheba here, and refers to Queen Vashti as she refused the king at that point, so Bathsheba's at fault here. And I'm sorry if that's the stance you take. I just think it's a stretch from what we see in the biblical text to say that she's at fault or she's to blame here, because all we have from the text is that David is the one that is held accountable here, which we know he's the focus point, but I just don't know that we can look at her and be like, oh, well, she should be seen as a shameful person or just only this bad person because she was summoned by David and taken and he had sex with her, so that's a far stretch
telling
for
me about that,
yeah.
And it was written in the late 19th century, I think.
Yes, yeah.
When male chauvinism was nothing but the top thing. Unfortunately, that same thing goes on today where the woman gets blamed for stuff. I hear people say, well, women ought not dress in a certain way because men can't help themselves. Yeah, they can. I mean, Paul helped himself in Corinth without having sex for a year and a half with a prostitute when the city was absolutely overrun with them. And he went to all kinds of different places where there were all kinds of nonsense going on. He refrained from it. I believe that Jesus was tempted in all ways as we are, beyond just what was in Matthew 4. And so, yes, they can help themselves. I'm not saying women should dress provocatively, but I think that take right there is hurtful even to women today who have endured something like this, and to think, oh, now the Bible tells me that. And it is poor exegesis to compare this to the situation with Queen Vashti, who was a co-regent in Persia centuries later, versus a woman who was the wife of a general. David's at fault here. And if we want to talk about men, then David ought to be a better man of God. He is in a position of higher responsibility, of higher power, and, as we know from the great Uncle Ben in Spider-Man. with great power comes
great responsibility.
That's right. And so even if she had been a temptress, David should have resisted in doing it. And we have that ability to do. Look how Uriah resisted his own wife. You know, she was like, you.
And that's the interesting part of the story to me.
He resists doing anything. You know, he doesn't go get drunk with his men. He doesn't go home to his wife. He doesn't do all those things. David is not scot-free here.
Oh, no.
No matter what she was doing. And I
because
think
David's like not where he's supposed to be.
No.
His like servants there are like, now you know who that is. You know, like,
that's
and
right.
he still sends for her.
Nobody
then
knows
you have
what's going
Uriah who shows his honor by not going into his wife because he's supposed to be at war. You know, like David tries to get him drunk. You know, like it's just like.
The thing about David is not as if he's going without sex.
Yes.
He's already got multiple wives and concubines.
Yeah, possibly I think 7 at this point or something.
That's
like
just
that.
wives that we know names. And in the text, like in First Chronicles, and many other concubines. David, we know, had concubines because remember, Absalom slept with all of them later on in the narrative. So David is not some poor, sex-deprived man with no access to women, and Bathsheba tempted him because David he was going without sexual relationships. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, we may find out one day that that's 100% correct, but the text doesn't paint that picture. David is 100% at fault.
All right, so let's skip ahead, I guess, to the next point in the narrative if you're ready for it.
We go all the way. Yeah, we'll go with the next book.
Yes, we will skip over to 2 Kings, I believe. First Kings chapter 1. Sorry. Oh, man.
It was all one scroll at one time. That's what you meant.
That's true.
That's what you meant. The book of the Kings is what you really meant to say. At the very beginning of the book of the Kings. Good old David has gotten up there in years. He's ready to pass away.
All right, so
with his fathers.
Here we have another debate about Bathsheba as well. Is she clueless or is she a mastermind?
She is an airhead if she is not. And I don't really think that that's the case. I'm probably going to be on the side of Bathsheba and not unusual at all, as a queen mother. We could talk about different roles that women had.
Mm-hmm.
You're either the queen, meaning you're the co-regent with the king, or you're the queen because the king died, and now you're the queen, like queen. You know, we have like with, or your father was the king, and you get promoted, or you're a queen mother, meaning your child is being promoted to be the king, but you still have a great deal of political influence and power. In the very early stages, and that's I think where we are,
especially here. Solomon's a mama's boy. You can tell.
Yeah, he's a mama's boy.
I'm going to go to her to influence him. But all right, Tim, walk us through what's going on. Well, this is probably not as familiar to people.
No, it's not, and it's probably not familiar with people, although here recently this is probably more familiar to people with there being a lot of mayhem and the change of power. But David had a lot of sons, a lot of different sons. And Adoniah, or Adonijah, if you prefer to pronounce J's in Hebrew that don't exist. But Adoniah here he's got a legitimate claim to the throne. He is older than Solomon. He's obviously Solomon's half-brother because he was David's child by a different wife, Haggith, I think is her name. And typically in the ancient Near East, there's not a change in power, certainly not a change in dynasty, without some violence. You seldom just left the throne in old age. I mean, David is kind of blessed to have lived old age. Nobody's betrayed him. Nobody's stabbed him in the back. Nobody's conspired against him and killed him. Typically very violent. And if we read the story back on, there's a lot of leftovers, if you will, in David's time, especially with Joab and some others, where there's some unfinished business, like Joab killing Absalom and stuff, and a lot of things that Solomon's going to come to the throne, and what I like to say is settle all the family business. But here we have a problem. David has apparently told Bathsheba that Solomon will be king when I die. Okay. And Nathan knows that. Nathan's got to be really getting up there in years, I guess, by this time. But we have a situation where Adonijah is sacrificing. He's essentially celebrating his claim to the throne. He's invited all the dignitaries and the high priest and everybody. But you know who he didn't invite? He didn't invite Bathsheba and Solomon.
Yeah.
And so what Bathsheba and Solomon must know is we're dead people. We're dead if this, because you also don't leave any other claimants to the throne. David did that with Mephibosheth,
yes, which made that
it was a
story
mistake.
So unique.
Yes, and it was a mistake. It turned out to be a mistake because he couldn't be trusted. And so what you do is you wipe out everybody. There's not one living relative of Saul. You go find his third cousin, you kill them. Nobody is left. And so they know that our name is mud. Now we're dead meat if we don't do this. And so Bathsheba, so innocently, Nathan comes to Bathsheba first and kind of gets her to act on his behalf. And so but if you want to walk us through the narrative, you can do that.
All right. So at first, yeah, that's fine. At first, she goes in to David and tells David, hey, remember you made this promise that Solomon would be the one to reign, and Adoniah is doing this. And anyways, and then Nathan told her, hey, once you go in, I'll come in and like vouch for you or whatever. So that's the first part of it, which goes fine. But then in the second part, in 1 Kings chapter 2, once King Solomon is going to, hang on,
once
I got mine.
King?
Yeah, once he is king. Sorry, I got my notes messed up.
Chapter 1's long, so you have Nathan in this, and it turns around where Solomon is made king.
Yeah, Solomon is now made king, and now Abnai, comes to Bathsheba and was like, hey, since, I'm getting kind of cut out here, will you do me this favor? And I need you to say yes. It's pretty much what he does. But he asked her probably an odd request for a lot of us today is he wants to be married to one of David's concubines.
Abishag,
Yeah. And why, Tim, why would he want that?
If you have the king's concubines in his harem, you have conquered the king. We see that later on. We saw that in David's life with Absalom, who went out and slept with all of David's concubines in front of everybody. For me to take a king's harem, for me to take a king's woman or women was mean I've conquered you. I've conquered you. I've taken that. I've got your domain now. You're powerless. And so Abishag, if you remember, she hasn't even had, as far as we know in the biblical text, has sex with David. She's brought to him when he's old and he's cold. At the very beginning of this text, and they bring a young woman in to keep him warm. But the text, I think, in chapter 1 says, and the king knew her not, in chapter 1, verse 4 of 1 Kings. And so she's very beautiful. And so David's just needing someone to lay with him and keep warm. And so it obviously, as you'll talk about in a minute, King Solomon's reaction is like, if you give her,
he understands.
If you give her, you might as well take the whole kingdom. And so it's hard.
So Bathsheba says yes, then goes to Solomon and said, hey, I need you to say yes to this. And Solomon says, sure, Mom, whatever you want, I'll give to you. And then when she says that, Solomon loses his cool because he's like, why? You just want me to give him the whole kingdom? Like he definitely understands that this is a power play or some type of trying to publicly embarrass or still to kind of take over him. So
I don't know if he smacked Bathsheba upside the head and said, Mom, have you lost all your sense in you? But as you said, it brings about the concept is this all a ploy by Bathsheba to eliminate a rival to her son?
Because in his anger, he ends up killing him. So
yes, and I would have too. The problem is he should have killed him anyway. Solomon should have killed him anyway. And we're like, how can he kill his half-brother? I was very easily, whatever. He could get, I think, what is it, Benaniah he sends to kill him, his henchman. What is his henchman?
I forget the guy's name.
I can't remember what his names are. And go and kill the guy. But I don't know now I would say I'm a little bit more reticent to say that Bathsheba had no ill intent here towards Adoniah. Maybe if not, she's the most naive person who has lived with David, a king in the seat of politics in the ancient Near East and at least in the country of Israel, unless she learned nothing as a nobleman's wife, as the wife of a king, to have enough sense. You know what I mean? It doesn't jive. It just doesn't jive at all.
In this day and age, I don't see that this is really viewed so much as wickedness as just,
that's how you play the game.
This is what you did.
This is what you did.
She's protecting her son,
that's right,
from him being killed.
Who God said is going to sit on the throne of David. That's a promise made. And what was his name? Jedediah. In Solomon has a different name too. That he is going to be the one that inherits it. So
what David did was unique in waiting on God's timing to not take Saul out. But that's not normally what was done, so.
No, I would not have done that. And I definitely would have killed everybody kin to Solomon. So I'm a little bit suspect here that Bathsheba kind of knew what would happen when she went and told Solomon. And obviously there were tension because when Adoniah comes to Bathsheba and, hey, will you see me? She's like, do you come in peace?
Yeah.
Or what, have you got a knife behind your back? Which Adoniah wouldn't have made it out of the room alive if he did something to her. But Adoniah goes, after this happens, Solomon's enraged. Adoniah goes and grabs the horns of the altar, hoping for mercy and not be put to death on that. But unfortunately, that's not how things worked out. And so he's not to be trusted. Adoniah, knows, of course, he goes and does all that once Solomon gets anointed king. He knows what's going on there, and it just doesn't work out in the long run for him.
Yeah. So from my study, that's pretty much what we know about Bathsheba.
Not
She's
much.
got
That's about it.
5 sons, like 4 that are named, but then the first one that dies about 7 days after birth. Another reference, like you would kind of think, at least in my mind, this story is like very popular, I feel like, in our modern day, that you would think, oh, that's probably something that's like referenced in other places in scripture and stuff. And It's not. Like Bathsheba gets mentioned in Matthew chapter 1 in the genealogy there, but not by name. In verse 6, it refers to her.
Just the wife.
And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Yeah. So once again, it's that just connection to Uriah, but not
it's
her
odd.
name mentioned.
It's odd, and I don't know why. I've never studied why maybe Matthew didn't just say her, because he does mention, for example, Rahab or Tamar, some women who may have had some questionable past, but maybe it's to memorialize Uriah a little bit. I don't know why he chooses to do that. I'm sure there's lots of different opinions out there on it. But yeah, after 1 Kings 2, I guess, where we had this whole scene where Adoniah is already, he's already almost thought he was going to die when Solomon was being made king, and goes and grabs the horns of the altar. And then once Solomon finds out he's trying to pull this, after that, Bathsheba just disappears. I couldn't find her name mentioned anywhere in Apocrypha, the Old Testament Apocrypha. I didn't look through all the Jewish writings in the Pseudepigrapha and other things. There are other writings I know in the rabbinical period maybe about her and what went on, but nothing major. It just doesn't seem that she's really thought of all that much later on. I don't know if that's intentional or just happenstance, but yeah, we don't have a lot of her after. She's not mentioned, like you said, at all in the New Testament.
Yeah. I think she's mentioned more now in our culture, just as I feel like as a culture, we're more mindful of some of the abuse that women have faced throughout time. So I think she's talked about more from that perspective as opposed to maybe importance on Jewish history and stuff. But she plays a huge role. Like when you think about what she did at the end of David's life of making sure that Solomon is the king and, the history that goes
pivotal
on from
role.
there. So
Very pivotal role.
Yeah.
Right. And, I think people, if you ask them what stories they know about David, they're going to know about David and Goliath, and they're going to know about David and Bathsheba.
Yes.
And so her name gets mentioned often, but she doesn't. But she was the queen. I didn't go do the math on how many years she was queen with David, or one of them, one of his wives. And so very, very important person in the Bible. Like you said, at a turning point in the history of Israel, what would have happened if Adoniah had stayed king? Who knows? Maybe Israel would still be together. I don't know, but she plays a pivotal role. But yes, she does not get much press after that. Not nearly as much press as today, especially in the mouths of Southern women, as the name Jezebel, and who, of course, we'll talk about next week, and does get mentioned in the New Testament.
Tim, any other closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I think it is unimportant. I think that Bathsheba had any culpability in this whole situation. But the text sure does just show us, and I think rightly so, David, and it's one of the things I admire about Scripture is David was fallible.
Yes.
And in a lot of ancient Near Eastern mythology and even Greco-Roman mythology, sometimes, we think, we paint our heroes and they're infallible. They don't ever do anything wrong, but we think about everything from David to Samson to others to Abraham. There's a lot of people that Noah, there's a lot of wonderful people of God who were not infallible and they made mistakes. And Bathsheba here is not the point of the story. The point of the story is that David did make a mistake. He was derelict in his duties. But ultimately, he turned around. He repented. He had faith in God. He was sorry for what he did. He paid a terrible price for that in the loss of a male son. And then he picked himself back up, dusted himself off, dressed himself, cleaned himself up, and went back about the business of running the kingdom.
Yeah. At your lowest point or darkest time in life, like God still offers you hope, offers you forgiveness if you're willing to submit to him. So it's a beautiful reminder, even in our mistakes there. If you got any questions or suggestions for future topics, let us know by emailing us at podcast@mountjuliet.org. To our fellow students of Scripture, thank you for joining us for tech support. We hope you will join us next week.
This is a podcast of the Mount Juliet Church of Christ. You can find more personal growth resources like this one at mountjuliet.org/resources. The Mount Juliet Church of Christ exists to glorify God and make disciples by helping people grow in Christ, love one another, and serve others.